Hello Sodbusters. Today's job is to rescue a colony of honeybees from a downed tree. This is a tree that's in the cemetery right behind my house. In fact, my backyard is right over there. This tree came down yesterday in some bad weather that we had come through, but the bees are still inside of the tree and based on the traffic at their entrance seem to be doing all right. And I'm going to try to do this job as quickly as possible today, meaning I'm not going to try to open up the tree and cut them out. It's not damaged where the colony is, so it's not urgent to get the comb and the bees out of there. So to expedite this process, all I'm going to try to do is to cut out the section of this tree that houses that colony and take that back home. And then I can take my time and open up the log at my leisure and remove the bees if I want to do that, or I may just leave it as a natural hive. One thing that's going to make this a little bit of a challenge is that this limb is not actually on the ground. It's suspended, held up by the top parts of the limb. I'm going to try to be as gentle as I can. So I'm going to start working from the top end and take off some of the extra foliage up there. And I do have some 4x4s. I'm going to try to prop this section up when I'm ready to cut it out, then let it down easy and wheel it away on a dolly. Obviously, I'm not sure how far down this hive goes, but I'm suspecting I can probably cut it about there. The entrance is over here. That's about a 3-foot span. Even if the comb does go that far, I'm still going to retain a lot of that comb in that section of the trunk. It's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you get until you open it up. So let's open it up. Cut off and was fortunate enough to cut off right above the hive. So this is the piece I cut off, and there's no comb up in there, but that's where the cavity starts. And so I opened up the cavity there. You can see there's a little comb inside of there. Maybe it'll show up on the camera. And so we got the very top of the hive right there. Although I thought the tree was resting on the upper branches, it turns out that wasn't really the case. It was just the trunk kind of holding itself up here. Cutting off that top part didn't cause it to lower down at all, and that's okay. I'll take some logs and stuff and pile under there to support it as I cut it off. But what I'll do now is take a piece of wood and cap the top of this off to enclose this while I work on cutting it off at the bottom. Well, I've got just a slight change in my plans. I said earlier I brought along some 4x4s to try to build some sort of support so this log doesn't just drop on the ground. It may be a fine idea if I had time to do the engineering on that, but there's too much space here to just stack 4x4s and have them hold it up. And so instead I've taken some of the logs and actually cut a few specifically for this and kind of built up a little platform, or built up some logs for the limb to land on. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off and try to do so slowly so that it'll kind of ease down onto these logs. Before I start doing this, I do want to mention this is not a how-to video on how to operate a chainsaw. I am not a professional arborist or tree cutter. Had some experience with the chainsaw, but I may make some safety mistakes, and if you catch any, please go ahead and call those out. I'm always willing to learn how to do better. But before I start, I will mention, if you are out operating a chainsaw, always use safety precautions. This is going to seem a little hypocritical, but you should always be wearing safety glasses. I should have my chaps on. I have a pair of chainsaw chaps that under normal circumstances, if I'm out cutting wood, I will normally wear those. I have a helmet with the face shield. I normally wear safety glasses, and I try to be pretty careful about that. Today I kind of had to make a choice of saying, with the amount of wood cutting I'm doing, which is minimal, and the chance that these bees are going to get really ticked off when I start sawing into their hive, I'm going with the safety equipment for the bees, which is why I have my full jacket on, even though I'm kind of soaking it with sweat today. If you're operating a chainsaw, study up, wear the safety gear, understand things like kickback and some of the precautions that you should take to operate the chainsaw safely. I don't want to see anybody getting hurt, and I don't want to do anything that would provide a bad example. Case in point. That bee just gave me a fat lip right there, so that's going to be pretty. So I'm suited up now for the bees, but what I was going to say is I don't want to see anybody following my bad example and getting hurt. So make sure to take precautions for your own safety. Shoulder. They are not giving any quarter here. Gosh. There. That comes out pretty nicely. Well, now I've got the log hive ready to go. And I got a bunch of ticked off bees. But I'm not going to take that right now. I'm going to wait till tonight, till most of the forager bees are back. I'll come back tonight around dusk, put some screen over the entrance, and then take it to my house. My house, as I mentioned, is just over there. So the foragers will return back here when they start going out tomorrow. So the best I can do for that, short of taking this out to some place several miles away, I'll take a bunch of these branches and put them in front of the entrance so that the bees, when they come out tomorrow, will hopefully be motivated to reorient. So we'll leave this for now and come back to it later. Things don't always turn out the way you hope. As I said I was going to, I got this log that was cut out there in the cemetery, moved back here to my house, set it up here behind my greenhouse, and was hoping to let these bees live out at least the rest of the year inside of their log hive. When I set it up, this angle that the log is at is certainly not the angle it was in that tree. I'm sure it was tilted over more. And this opening was probably not open to the sky. The bees would have been getting rained on, and they probably wouldn't have stayed in here as long as they have. But regardless of how the comb was oriented, it certainly runs the length of the log. So by standing it up on end like this, I at least have the comb somewhat vertical, although it might not be angled exactly the same way it was. But anyway, I loaded up the log as gently as I could onto my truck and got it home and got it set up back here. When I set it up, my original plan was to just close up this top end and give them a lower entrance. And I drilled an entrance down there and then thought differently about that because I didn't want to open up opportunity for robbers. And so instead I just put this little piece over top of the entrance here and screwed that on to kind of protect it from the weather. After I got it moved here, I couldn't stick around to really see what happened because I had to go out of town for a couple days, and so had to wait a few days to really see how well the bees got settled in here. Well, the news is not good. The comb inside the log was apparently broken up much more than I realized by that tree falling down, although I'm sure the trip from the cemetery home here didn't help it either. I knew there was some comb that was collapsed in here, and there was some honey leaking out around the bottom of this log where I had capped it off with that board. So bees, very likely robber bees from some of my other hives, have been foraging on that honey around that base. And that's okay, it's outside the hive, that's fair game. When I came home and looked at this hive, I thought it looked like there was some gentle traffic, although very low traffic, at this entrance. Well, I took this cap off and looked inside, and the comb that was inside of there is completely collapsed. It looks like wax moths have kind of taken over. There's a big pile of comb at the bottom, and the bees had started to build a little new comb at the top, but it looks like the colony that was in here either absconded as a whole, the whole colony took off and left, or possibly the queen got killed in that comb collapse, and so the bees that were remaining have just kind of scattered. But either way, this colony that was in here is completely gone now. There's not hardly any comb left behind, so this was not a successful move. But while this was not successful, I had another log hive rescue that turned out differently. The day after I got back from my trip out of town, I got a call from somebody else who had an issue with bees in a tree. In this case, they were cutting down a tree in their backyard, and there were bees in about an 8-foot section of the trunk of this tree. I have to give credit to the tree climber who was cutting the tree, because he climbed up the tree as he was cutting into it. The bees got mad, as you'd expect, and they started going after him. So he climbed down and climbed back up and kept cutting, and climbed down and climbed back up and kept cutting and kept after it until he got this section out of the tree and drug out to the front yard of his home. And they called me urgently wanting to get the bees out of this tree and off their property because they had a neighbor who was apparently very allergic to bee stings and was very concerned about these bees that were irritated at being cut out of their home and flying all around. So I grabbed my stuff quickly, forgot to get my camera, so I didn't get any video of that process, and I showed up, and this section of tree is laying on the front yard about 8 feet long, and in that case the section was too big for me to practically get home. That is, the tree cutter had the means to load the tree into my truck, but I'd have no way of getting it out once I got it here. So my only option was to get the bees out of that tree. Thankfully, there was an open end, which was at the bottom of the hive, and at the very top of the hive, there was a cut partway through the log, which also went into the hollow cavity. So at the open end, where there was a knothole entrance just above the cut, I would put some smoke in there to try to encourage the bees to leave, which is what's called a forced abscond, forcing the bees to abscond or leave their hive. And I would alternate between putting smoke in on the one end and then on the opposite end where the cut was. This worked really well because bees are excellent ventilators. So when I would put some smoke in on the bottom end, the cut end, the bees would start fanning to push the smoke out. So then I'd go up to the opposite end where there was just a cut partway through, and I'd start pushing smoke in through that cut. And because the bees were already ventilating out at the other end, they would just draw that smoke in and through the log. Now it took some time, but every time I applied smoke, more bees would leave. And I set a small 6-frame Layens box at the end of that log. I put a little bit of Swarm Commander on the front of it to make it even more attractive, hopefully. And as the bees would come out of that log, they did seem to congregate on or in front of that box. And so little by little, I'd encourage the bees. More bees each time would come out of the log and to the box. And as we got towards the end of the evening, it looked like there were a lot of bees on the box, but still a lot inside of the log. So I finally bit the bullet and just cut the log open in order to look for the queen, mainly, and try to make sure I had the full colony. When I opened it up, I could see that the forced abscond had been pretty successful. There weren't a lot of bees left inside of that hive. And I started cutting through the comb and gave some of the honeycomb to the tree cutter. I think he deserved it after the stings he took. And I also was able to cut out a section of capped brood and mount that in a frame to take along with the bees, but I never found the queen in that hive. The bees were still congregating on the front of the box, and to be honest, they never really all went into the box. I ended up bringing the box home with bees hanging on the front of it, even though there were a lot of bees inside of the box as well. But as I was encouraging the bees to go in, trying to puff a little smoke to get the bees to get away from the smoke and inside of the box, I did see the queen crawling under the mass of bees on the front of the box. So it does appear that the queen went along with the colony just fine. So that was good news that we got the colony, we got the hive out of the tree. I actually ended up sectioning up that tree and bringing it home so that it wouldn't attract robber bees to the remnants of the honey. And I brought those bees home and was able to introduce them into one of my own hives, this one right here behind me. So I guess you could say one moral of this story is that sometimes things just don't work out. The smaller log I was able to bring home, thinking it would be better to leave the bees in their natural hive, that turned out to be a poor decision. And the larger cutout, which to be honest, based on the size of it, I was kind of dreading, it turned out to be a fairly easy matter to get those bees to move into a different box. But I think there's a bigger lesson here, and that is that sometimes the easy way is not the best way. Sometimes you just have to bite the bullet. Had I cut open that first log and extracted the bees that way, or smoked them out like I did in the second case, maybe it would have had a different outcome. In any case, I think the overall lesson that I get every time I do any of this is every opportunity is a learning opportunity. In the end, I did get another colony of bees out of this, so I guess the net result is good. What have been some of your hard lessons learned? Something that you did in beekeeping or gardening or any other aspect of life where you followed what you thought was a great plan, but it just didn't work out the way you expected and you had to learn a lesson from it. Go ahead and post that in the comments. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, you may enjoy this other video that YouTube has selected, especially for you. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.